Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of events. Today we're talking about clean energy, and we've got a great panel of experts here to answer your questions and have a great discussion. Over on the right hand side of your screen, you'll see a chat box where you can submit your questions all the way through, and we will pick them up at the end and try and answer as many as possible. And if you have any technical problems, then please don't worry too much. It's being recorded. You can catch up at any time after the event. And without further ado, I will hand over to Bridget, who is hosting our event today. And I hope you have a great time. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And thank you for organising this. It's an incredibly timely event, not just because of the sort of current UN climate discussions going on in New York, and also obviously the forthcoming COP26 meeting in Glasgow, which frames everything to do with energy at the moment, but also because what's been highlighted in the last couple of weeks is just the complexity of energy policy and thinking about how we move towards cleaner energy systems. Partly that's connected to the rise in gas prices and the knock-on implications for energy security, fuel poverty, your own energy bills, and partly also increased levels of activism as well, with energy efficiency finally getting a bit sexy with Insulate Britain blocking the M25. So what we're seeing is a whole pile of sort of energy issues rising up the political agenda, highlighting both the urgency of needing to think about change and also the complexity of how to bring about that change. So as Emma says, we've got a great panel here today, two academics, Peter Connor and Callum Harvey-Scholes, Simon Mendham from global healthcare company GSK, and also Alice Goodbrook, who works for the UK, Innovate UK, thinking about international aspects of energy access. So we've got a really broad set of expertise, and I really hope that you sort of plug into that and ask people really quite searching questions. So I'm just going to quickly ask all of the panel members to give a very brief overview of who they are, and then we'll crack on with some questions. Peter, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm Peter Connor. I'm an Associate Professor of Sustainable Energy Policy. I'm embedded as a researcher within the Renewable Energy Engineering Group at the University of Exeter's Cornwall campus, where I teach and research in heat policy and sustainable heat policy and electricity policy and a bit of smart grid stuff.
Thank you. Callum?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Bridget. I'm Callum. I'm also a researcher at the University of Exeter working on energy policy. My work has covered local government policy, the role of citizens in policy change, and heat governance at a local level. I'm currently working with cities to accelerate their decarbonisation of heat, and I previously worked installing solar batteries and heat pumps.
Brilliant. And you're an alumnus of the Sustainable Development Masters.
Indeed.
A long time ago. Alice, you're up.
Hi everyone, I'm Alice Goodbrook. I'm an innovation lead at Innovate UK, which is part of UKRI. We're the UK government's innovation agency aimed at getting innovation to market as quickly as possible. The programme I run is called Energy Catalyst, and it focuses on getting innovation in energy access out in Africa and Asia.
Brilliant, thanks Alice. Simon?
Hi, yeah, Simon Mendham. Been in the energy industry for about 30 years, currently work for GlaxoSmithKline or GSK, and I buy energy buyer or energy procurement for basically Europe and APAC. But in recent years, most of my focus has been on renewable energy schemes, and GSK did announce a project I've been working on at the climate conference in New York yesterday in Scotland, which I can answer questions on. Brilliant.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to finding out about that later. Just a sort of a kick-off question for you to while people think about their own questions. I mentioned the sort of rising gas prices and the knock-on implications of that. So I was just wondering whether any of you had any thoughts about what the longer-term implications of this are, just beyond the sort of the day-to-day politics of managing the current situation.
I can answer some of this. So there has been peaks and troughs in the energy markets all the time I've been involved in it. And sitting at GSK, we call hedge it, buy energy up to 3 years in advance. So we are protected from some of this, but not all of this. The expectation is it probably will fall again, as it's traditionally done, up and down over the years. There was a huge peak in 2008, 2009. The energy price doubled or trebled, and then it went back to the previous level. My personal view is I think it will come off. It's when it does is the difficult thing to project, whether it's at the end of the winter. And it's not just being driven by gas prices, it's being driven by carbon emissions prices in the European ETS and UK ETS scheme. So big industrials like GSK, we have to reduce our carbon emissions, otherwise we're effectively fined by the government. We have to buy credits. Those prices have spiked, and a lot of that's driven actually by higher emission reduction targets being set under the phase 4 of the ETS. So this is a double whammy of high gas prices and carbon prices. So I think the carbon prices may not soften, but I think the gas should, but it's just how quickly that happens is a difficult thing. And as a domestic customer, like everyone else on this call, completely exposed to it, whereas industrials have some protection by hedging in that. So that's my sort of answer on it.
Peter, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I think some of the implications are going to be, it's probably going to be too early to say. So I think what we're seeing is a much more public debate about things like wind and nuclear and energy efficiency. And I think, so you mentioned Insulate Britain coming out, and insulation and improving energy efficiency is clearly one of the sort of the biggest hedges we can do in the long term. So the UK housing stock is appalling. People are already calling out for improvements, and it is a key way to do it. But we, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've undermined energy efficiency policy in multiple ways, and we need to really take some strong action to address that. And it's whether we get some impetus. I think there's been a very strong anti-wind thing that's come out of it. So I think we saw something similar happen with the power shutdowns in Texas in the winter. But it's whether that gains any traction. We've had a commitment in the November 10-point plan last year that we're going to aim for another 30 gigawatts of offshore wind, as well as continuing to go as actually starting up our onshore wind again. Are we going to see some pushback against that sort of penetration? So that will essentially treble how much energy we get from wind energy. So are we going to see a pushback against that? Because I think there's a clear set of people who are making that case. And I don't think the interesting stuff is not really seeing anything about nuclear, even though I think something like 4 or 5 of the UK's nuclear power plants are offline at this moment. And that doesn't seem to have made the news stories, but that's clearly going to have an impact on where our electricity is coming from. So I think there's 3 key areas where we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, but there's potential for all 3 of them to be hit by the political furore, because we're not seeing the end of that. Of course, if we keep seeing very high prices, then we're not going to see that balancing out and see that price reduction come through until you've had a very high bill at some point.
When you talk about pushback on renewables, do you mean a public pushback or a political one?
I'm not sure how divisible those things will be. So I think you've certainly got a portion of the media who's trying to make a case that it's the fault of wind energy. I think we've seen that story in the Mail, in the Express, in the Telegraph this week. I was asked to be interviewed by Nigel Farage yesterday.
Oh wow!
GB News. I said no because it seemed like such an obvious setup. But yeah, I think there is definitely a portion of the media trying to make it wind's fault, when actually what we're seeing is a gas shortage, nuclear power plants down, wind not being very windy, all at the same time. And but who gets the political benefit of that is too early to say.
Okay. I think I think as part of this as well, it is the gas prices, but it's actually really what it's showing is our exposure to gas in the UK, and that is where so much of our energy comes from. And so I think that's the other thing is actually, as Peter sort of said, is actually getting off gas and reducing our reliance on that, more than half of which is of course imported. And that's that proportion, or at least the amount of domestic gas is only really we know it's falling. So I think working in the long run towards that, but I mean, there's some short-term implications, as Simon alluded to, is that actually most of our gas usage in the UK is obviously for heating homes, and so as the winter comes on, this sort of price crunch is only going to get more acute.
So I think what this crisis seems to show is actually the geopolitical nature of energy, which I think people sometimes forget. You know, it doesn't help that the interconnector's down as well at the moment. As Callum said, we import most of our gas, and the fact that most of our gas is used for heating. And the UK government has yet to make a decision on what we're going to do with heating in terms of kind of, you know, going to this renewable climate future. Are we going to go down hydrogen? Are we going to go down electric? And they've been delaying this for years and years. So hopefully, I'm hopeful, if we can look at a glass half full, that this crisis will actually push them to make a decision on what we're going to do, which we've been needing for a very, very long time.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I'll come back to that sort of level of political inaction, hopefully towards the end of this. But I wanted to pick up on something Simon was talking about, which is carbon prices. And do you think, Simon, that carbon prices are a useful tool in encouraging future development and investment into renewables, or do you think, you know, should other tools be used, or are other tools more effective? Or
I think,
what do you think? How do we best encourage investment, I suppose?
So the good news, the good thing out of this is high energy prices improve paybacks on energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, and I suppose the EU ETS has been a bit of a carrot and a stick because it's given too many free allowances away, and historically, but now they're tightening that. So I think it is forcing our prices up as domestic customers, but on the other hand, it's promoting, you know, low carbon sources as it is at GSK. So what I can tell you is we're looking at a lot of renewable electricity projects, and actually this helps the case. The business case, because the paybacks reduce by the high energy prices. Now I know the other side of that is it's high energy cost for our business, and we've seen I've forgotten the exact name of them, but the fertilizer producer and the CO2. The high energy costs can cost production, of course, but for what I'm involved in, and I have been for 30 years, to be honest, energy efficiency, it helps the case because it makes, you know, energy efficient or low carbon projects cheaper, basically, in the long run.
And so are boardrooms thinking about that then? Is it an explicit part of decision making?
What I would say is this brings it to their attention. So, I mean, I've been through this curve about 4 times at 3 different companies I work for. When the energy price peaks, I have to speak to almost the boardroom and tell them what's happening next. It definitely brings their attention to it. And during periods of low energy prices, which, you know, there's been various stages of that, there was a short-term bit around COVID. That's the opposite, of course, because energy's cheap. So it will encourage, what the other panelists said, encourage investment. I mean, the electrification of heat argument, obviously, the switch from electrification of heat and heat pumps is expensive and long paybacks, as is from what I've seen of hydrogen. And this will only potentially improve those business cases.
Okay, brilliant. This might be a good time for you to talk to people about your Scottish case. Was that something that was influenced by fossil fuel, energy, fossil fuel prices and things? Or how did that come about?
Okay, so our site, we've got a site, it's now on the internet, so I can talk about it. We've got a site in Irvine in Scotland, which is one of our biggest energy users in the world, actually. And that site actually has always been at the forefront of energy efficiency. It's always had a strong team. So not just, they have guys on site that look at energy efficiency, and this solar and wind scheme we announced first came to fruition about 5 years ago, and it's taken a long time to get there. And one of the key bits is it going to save us money? So number one, it has to save us money. Number two, we, like most corporates, have had various carbon reduction targets, and now we've now set a journey. It's what we call RE100, 100% renewable electricity by 2025, and net carbon zero by 2030. So it ticks those boxes. It saves money, and this is actually it's reducing our energy price at that site by having a wind and solar farm there. So this is 2 big, almost marine wind turbines, 150 meters tall, generating, I'll quote some numbers, it is on the internet. They're 4 megawatt capacity wind turbines, 2 times those, and we've got a 20 megawatt solar farm, which is, I'm told, is one of the biggest on-site attached to a factory or anything like that schemes in the UK. This is just starting construction now for operating next year, but basically it's going to save us £1 to £2 million a year in our energy cost, plus reduce our carbon by 10,000 tonnes, plus work towards what we call our global RE100 target, which is basically all our electricity in the world. So it delivers on all those aspects, and I'm really pleased. I've been driving that project with one other guy for the last 5 years, and it's now under construction finally, which is great. And it's not, so I'll just explain something. It's called a power purchase agreement. We're basically paying for this in electricity bills over 20 years into the future. The developer called Farm Energy are building it, operating it, and they sell us the electricity, but it's on our land, so we rent them the land. So it's quite well, it's not unique, but it's, it's a complicated situation.
I mean, that's pretty impressive, actually. And that must have that must have required a huge amount of board buy-in and sort of board attention in order to get that.
It did. I mean, these are complicated contracts, and by the way, we're looking at probably another 10 schemes like this, maybe none quite as big, maybe one other as big as this. Plus, over those 5 years, there was a lot of hours getting this approved by the board at various levels, and the risk, because it's a long-term commitment, we have to commit to buy the energy for 20 years, which means we've got to think we're going to be on that site for 20 years, which is obviously good for, there's a sort of byproduct. It makes the security of the site better as well for the guys who work on the site, the people who work on the site, as to say. So
yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. One of the and that's one example of a company taking action to reduce its carbon footprint. Does anyone have any thoughts on what other effective ways companies might reduce their carbon footprints? Peter?
Not specifically. I tend to deal in sort of bigger picture stuff. So, I mean, I think it sounds like what Simon's been doing with GSK has been something that we'll have to see more companies doing.
Yeah.
I think we do need to find innovative ways to actually have installs. Not everybody will have that land available. And not everybody will be big enough to have somebody like Simon who can be the champion for that company. So I think we are going to have to look at innovative ways to do things like install heat pumps. So the changing the electricity is like stage one, and then you've got to see if you can decarbonize your gas supply if you're heating with gas. So I think it's 55% of UK businesses heat with gas, as opposed to 85% of houses. But that's still a huge fraction. And so how do you decarbonize that straightforwardly? So, if you're a relatively small electricity consumer, you can go to something like Good or something like Ecotricity and just buy your renewable energy. But even that requires a certain amount of expertise to not just end up with some sort of there's issues around that marketplace. But then to actually decarbonize your gas as well is a big jump, because you're going to have to put in something which isn't a gas boiler, probably a heat pump. Alice has already mentioned the potential for things like hydrogen, and that's another jump forward entirely. And it's how to get the expertise for companies to be in a position to make those decisions, I think, is going to be really challenging. I mean, not just that, then there's the issue of how do you get all the people to do, to put all the heat pumps in that we need nationally. So there's some really big, not just the infrastructure, but the sort of decision making and the skills training as well will need to supplement some of this stuff. So those are big challenges that will have to be done at a national level, maybe supplemented by some local policy, local authorities getting involved. But yeah, there's a lot to do, and if anything, decarbonizing heating will be more difficult than decarbonizing electricity.
So we obviously work through Innovate UK with lots of SMEs, and we're given grant funding to do technology projects, sometimes business models. And we throw it on its head slightly and kind of view sustainability and the requirement for net zero as an opportunity. And those that can tackle that opportunity first will become leaders in the market. So it's very much trying to prep the new companies that are coming up in whatever they're doing in order to do it in the most sustainable way, because you're future-proofing your business. Because at one point in time, it will no longer be possible to do things in the way that we've been doing it now, either from like people that are doing fleet management to convert to hydrogen early, or actually even saying, well, is your technology right for market if it isn't thinking about the market within a sustainable kind of terms. And I think that's quite an interesting way for business owners to actually get their head round, to start thinking about kind of what's the opportunity to do good business practice in a way that is not destroying our climate and our world.
And are they receptive to that? Do you get, to use Peter's word, pushback, or how do you sell that to them? Because they're traditionally very reluctant to do something new.
So the SMEs that are kind of innovative, generally they're interested in doing new things. They want to tackle things differently, and especially the ones that are working in the space that I work in terms of energy access, but even the wider, slightly bigger companies that we work for. And it's about, like I say, it's promoting it as an opportunity. Like, it is good business sense to do things in a net zero and sustainable fashion, because if you don't do it, you're going to be left behind. You can look at the big energy firms at the moment, the ones that will be here in the future and not the ones that are emitting all the carbon, because they won't be able to. And so, the small innovative companies can do that easier than the big companies that are set in their ways. And it's trying to kind of promote them, that if they can see the opportunity now, they will become those bigger companies in the future. So they're actually quite receptive to it.
Fab. I think I know your expertise, Alice, is in sort of access issues, and I was wondering, what we've talked about so far is some of the stuff and the debates that are going on in the UK. I was wondering if you could sort of set the context for your work and how, what sort of differences there are between what happens in the UK and what will happen in developing countries. What are the different issues that people face?
So there's a couple. So kind of on a I guess energy policy side of things, the big debate within developing countries is we need to develop our economies. Why should we spend the more expensive route to going down the renewables and distributed energy rather than going to the way that we all know by sticking either a nuclear power station or gas or oil or coal? And it's a very difficult argument for us sitting in the UK government to say, oh, no, you should definitely do renewables, because that's not our right to say it. So it's trying to kind of explain, I guess, actually the monetary opportunity that you've got by leapfrogging in terms of technology. So if you're going to, we are all looking at doing distributed energy in the UK and in Europe. So why would you put a big grid network in if you don't need to? It's expensive and it's probably unnecessary. And it's about getting kind of on a policy way for them to understand the opportunities and the fact that, it is proper electricity. You speak to people, and unless it's kind of grid infrastructure, they don't view it as electricity. It's quite an interesting kind of conversation that you can have with people. But yeah, it's about understanding that. But on a kind of a day-to-day level, actually, 1 billion people are still without energy access in the world. They all work on kerosene, and and it causes huge problems. How can we get renewable access to people on less than $1 a day, but with technology that isn't going to destroy their environment and is going to lead to job opportunities and economic growth opportunities, which isn't going to have to just be funded by the North. It's about giving people their own power to be able to make their own opportunities. And it's a really difficult, no one's found the way forward yet, otherwise we'd have a magic wand and be able to sort it. So it's a constant conversation of how we can, how the local context reach these places, or, what system we can put in place to make that happen.
So what is it that you do? How do you, you sort of put forward the arguments. How do you make the access issues become real?
You talk to people. So we've got, the fund that I run is about 140 million, and every year we generally, as an open competition, you apply into it. And what we're doing is trying to connect the challenge owners, so the people in country that have gone, we don't have energy access, or there's a specific problem they need they've got kind of a mini grid, but it's not 24 hours. So how can we improve the mini grid? Or actually they've got no energy access at all. So it's about kind of connecting the people with the solutions, which are, the UK is an expert in distributed energy. It's one of the leaders, but it's not just it's not a UK focus. It can be from anywhere in the world. So it's connecting the people that have a solution, the people that have the challenge, and making sure that solution and the challenge work together and works for the local people and the environment and the culture and the economy that they're in. So my job is basically talking to people, connecting people up, and then getting very clever people to do some very cool projects and trying to get some stuff on the ground to see if it works, to de-risk it, so eventually the private sector can take over and we won't need UK grant money in order to make it work.
Okay. So are those projects like community-owned projects, or are they?
It varies. So most of it's business-based. A lot of them have a community element to it, but sometimes it can just be a NGO in country talking to a big kind of large company in the UK, to install large-scale solar to a mini grid, an unreliable mini grid that's in the middle of a village. Or sometimes it can be actually they're installing a kind of a mini grid in like Sierra Leone and trying to work on productive use, so connecting up with some of the businesses are there to give them power, so then they can create more energy use and then use that in order to kind of justify and provide a stable economy for it, which then can allow some of the domestic users to get involved on a slightly cheaper rate. So it's trying to find, the different solutions that work for a particular area, because everywhere is different.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because with renewables, there are lots of different, it opens up the possibility for lots of different ownership and business models. And I know that's something you've thought about. And I know it's also something Callum's very interested in. So, I mean, do you see community ownership as becoming a big force in electricity systems, either in the UK or globally in future?
I really want it to be something in the UK. Like, I really do.
Do you want to explain what a community energy group is, or what community energy groups are, and how they differ from the current status of our electricity system?
There's loads of different forms of community energy, but the basis is that you use the community in order to fund and own the asset of energy generation or the energy efficiency measures. So it's about getting the local buy-in to actually own the thing that you're doing in order for it to work for the community rather than externals coming in. So it could be that there's community-owned wind farms, there's community-owned hydros. Sometimes it goes into schools and that gets used in to fund kind of local government. All sorts of different models out there. In Africa and Asia, where I work, it tends to be that the assets are owned by the community, and therefore the maintenance and I guess the business around those assets are built up with the community in mind. So everyone owns it, and it's not someone coming to install it, and eventually it breaks and no one does anything with it. So there's lots of different models, but I'm desperate for it to work. At the moment in the UK, it does work in terms of getting assets on the ground. I've always wanted a community energy company, and there has been some. So you've got like Bristol Energy, Robin Hood Energy. Bristol Energy is obviously no longer there. Robin Hood Energy is holding on. I don't think the model's been developed properly yet, but I'm desperate for it to work. And I think in Africa and Asia, where they have one big company which they're looking to, to democratize a bit. It has a massive potential. I've yet to see it work properly.
Why do you think it doesn't work, or hasn't worked so far?
Because they probably don't come at it with a business mind, if I'm honest. Like, I don't think the market's been ready for it yet. So the way that the regulations around what you can install and how you can access it, and everything, when you install an asset, you're just selling it and it goes into the ether. And you're not getting beneficial charges like GEOS and TUOS charges if you're using it locally. Now that's beginning to change, and Ofgem are looking at it. But until those, I guess, savings can come into effect, actually it doesn't, monetarily our system isn't set up to do it. So it just becomes quite a difficult job.
Okay. Yeah. Peter and Callum, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important issue, a really exciting space. And I think Alice brings that into really kind of sharp focus. And it's kind of interesting how we can kind of often see those things more obviously in other parts of the world. When in the UK, we just see it as a kind of technological problem that we need to solve. Gas prices are high, but we need to sort of insulate homes or something. But actually, we actually need to think about these people who are buying energy and using energy as more than that, and as actual citizens, and actually put citizens and people and communities right at the front of how we think about energy. I think basically front and center. And yeah, I think community energy in the UK has been a success story. It has been in the past, like in the last 10 years, there has been tremendous growth. But yeah, as Alice says, the market is made for big players, for bigger organizations, and community energy just isn't that. I mean, it doesn't want to be that, and it's not going to be able to kind of enter on a sort of fair footing into a market that's not built to allow smaller players kind of equal standing. So I think, yeah, but I think this links into some other things that we were talking about, and links into actually, well, sort of all of it. But I mean, Ripple Energy, who is one sort of company in the UK who's building wind turbines. I mean, they've actually been trying to make a big shout, kind of countering what Peter was talking about with this blame that's being thrown at wind from some quarters around the current hikes. Sort of pointing out that actually these higher energy prices, resulting from in a large degree from high gas, the high price of gas, is actually meaning that people who are the returns on wind turbines, on their community-owned wind turbines, are much higher. And actually, actually there's a lot more, as Simon mentioned, a bigger case for these community-owned assets. So yeah, we need new business models, and we need, there's ways that community energy needs to develop, but it also needs enabling, and I think that's part of it. We need, Ofgem, the markets to change. We need regulation and spatial planning to allow, the building of wind turbines, to allow solar to be installed, in sort of more progressive fashions. So I think there's a whole host of players, and government has a big role to play in really pushing it, which it has done in the past. Certainly up until 2015, in the coalition, there was more support for it at that point. So I think we need to be looking at government in a lot of ways, in the UK at least, to really enable communities to take ownership of their local energy.
I also think we have to kind of accept that obviously the people on this group right now love energy, or at least I do. Not everyone fundamentally cares. They just want their lights to turn on, and I think sometimes that we will get carried away when we talk about it, going, yeah, we can get the community involved and people can every day. Some people just don't want to. Some people are just quite happy to be oblivious. And actually, some of the innovation we're working on is around making things happen so people don't have to think about it. But it's still kind of tying the ownership and the asset ownership around kind of people, making people feel like they belong in their community, and tying it into a slightly different way of communities being driven, which I think goes beyond just community energy and just community ownership as a whole. I
think that, I agree. Not everyone's an energy nerd or finds it nearly as exciting, but I think there's also ways. I think there's more people who might be interested by energy, particularly if it's local and they can see what's happening. And you make it if it's local and it's relevant to them. And people do know they use energy, and admittedly, we know from the fact that no one switches tariff that, as you say, people by and large don't really want to spend lots of time on it a lot of the time. But I think community energy does present that opportunity to make it meaningful and relevant to people. And I think it also presents a massive opportunity to shift the power, actually, in terms of where power is in our energy system, and more broadly, actually, just socially, and actually really, the local economic benefits of community energy, and keeping that money locally and not giving it all to Centrica or some other even bigger company. Actually keeping that in the local community, employing people locally, those benefits are relevant to people, and I think communicating that better will kind of help some more people understand that energy is something that they might be interested in. But obviously there's plenty of people who it's not going to who want to just be able to switch the lights on and not have to think any more about it.
It's interesting, isn't it? You touch on, in terms of the benefits to the community. You've listed exactly the same benefits as Alice did when she was talking about them in terms of access in developing countries. But you're right, this idea of once you've got your electricity system and you're used to it and you take it for granted, you lose sight of those broader benefits, because actually, like Alice says, you just want the lights to come on. It's interesting. It's not just government policy that needs a shift, it's our mindsets as well. Peter, did you have any thoughts on community energy?
No, it's not something I pay much attention to. I do pay attention to it.
You've got your heat projects.
I do.
You've got your heat projects.
I guess I think Callum and Alice are better set to answer that.
All right. We'll come back to the heat stuff later, I think. But we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Well, we'll come back. There's one on heat, so we'll come back to that with Peter and Callum in a second. But the first one is, how can we improve the balance of energy provision, renewable versus fossil fuel? And I suppose, I'm assuming that's not just meaning in terms of technological provision and things, but also sort of policy frameworks and investment decision making and things like that. So if you were going to pick one thing that would drive, that would improve that balance, what would it be? Peter, let's start with you because this is right up your street.
I think this takes us into the territory of what we're going to, because we talk a lot. It's very easy when we talk about renewable energy to slip into talking about renewable electricity. And renewable electricity, we've got something like 35-40% of our electricity comes from renewables now. And it's very easy in conversation. I know I do it in lectures. It happens on TV all the time, where you just go start with electricity. But we also have to think, well, we use a huge amount of oil in the form of petroleum, in the form of diesel, in cars, and we have to decarbonize that. And we also use a huge amount. As individuals, we probably use more heat energy than we use electrical. So how do we decarbonize that? At the moment, we're talking about electrifying it. And that's great, if we did that and we can get a workable solution for, electric vehicles are coming through, heat pumps are coming through, we can go down that route. And it just means obviously that we need massive increases in the overall amount of renewable electricity that we produce. And I think there are different problems. I think that's the problem with answering this. You asked us to name one thing, and I think there's a big problem with naming one thing because I think there's different things that hold back different parts of the sector. So onshore wind, for example, barely had any build in onshore wind for the last 6 years in the UK because the government has used planning to stop it from happening. In other areas, there's a need for investment, and so Alice's organisation is trying to invest in some of these things and move them forward faster. So onshore wind is mature. We're just blocking it for other reasons, political reasons. Offshore wind is getting towards mature, and it's getting towards being cost competitive. And if electricity prices stay high, it probably already is cost competitive. And then we've got things like floating offshore wind, where it's getting the technology sorted out and then being able to get it to the stage where you can use a lot of it. And I think that's going to be one of the next big things. Of how you stick, and it seems as a non-engineer, it seems incredible to me that you can stick, 150-meter wind turbine on a floating platform and leave it at sea in the middle of a storm. And we are looking at that working. There's one just gone in off Scotland. So that's potentially. So there's different things there. So you've got to get the policy right. You've got to get the sort of social acceptability right. You've got to get the money right. You've got to get the technology right. And we are still waiting on some technologies to come through. Storage is an obvious one, that we need to do some work to get more storage cheaper, to probably get storage technologies that are still pretty immature through to a more mature phase. And then we need to work out how the best way to use them is as well, and where we put them on our networks. Do we put them in our homes? Do we use our car batteries? Do we put them on the network, on the grid somewhere at much larger scale? So I've kind of ignored your question there, that name one thing, because
No.
One thing is very hard to pin down because we need multiple solutions, and we need a chain that looks at the different things that we want to come through as solutions.
No, I have to say I agree with you, and it was unfair of me to ask you for one thing.
I just
fine. Callum, sorry. Yes.
Add one thing. I think, well, just two thoughts, I guess. I think one is, Peter's basically summarised the issues, but actually the numbers, I think, might add up to me, sort of stand out, that we actually only, the Committee on Climate Change actually estimate we only need to double our current electricity generation in total. So obviously only a portion of that is renewable, but we need to, in terms of total generation, we need to double that to include including electrifying how buildings and transport. So it's enormous growth because not all of that, it's not just a doubling because it's not all renewable yet, but it's not an amazing kind of increase when you consider that at the moment electricity is only about a sixth of our energy consumption. So actually, there's a huge efficiency that's going to come with this. We're actually going to need a huge amount less, can you say that? But far less energy in total. And I think, I think I'd also reiterate our earlier point of it's not just about how adding capacity, it's also about how you do it. Yeah. And I think, we face choices around whether we allow, big corporations to build big wind farms, and that's kind of stick with a fairly kind of constant model of the economic model we have at present, or we seize the opportunity to really empower communities and smaller actors to kind of take a portion of the pie and actually distribute power slightly more evenly.
Okay, brilliant. Simon, did you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I always think of the economics, and a lot of it does come down to money. I mean, the government in the past in the UK, which is why we're there now, had a lot of subsidy schemes, which obviously ends up in our consumer bills. So there is a balance. Sorry, and I know that what they call the renewable obligation and feed-in tariff. A lot of that has disappeared, but they still have the contract for difference. And it's similar in other European countries. So there is a carrot of subsidies that always helps. Now, I know the costs of solar and wind is now much being driven cheaper by market expansion. So maybe those subsidies are less required, but that probably always helps in the landscape with things, I think. And certainly companies like GSK, we are business. I mean, one of the projects I'm involved in, actually the energy is going to cost us more from a renewable plant, but there's a balance of how much more it can cost as well. So we don't just do things as they save us money, but it's got to be, it's not going to kill the business either. I'm talking it from a business perspective. I mean, my experience of community energy is it didn't happen sadly, but we were looking in buying energy from a community energy wind turbine scheme in the Lake District. It fell away as much because the site it was going to supply has closed or was about to close. But so that's my experience of that. So I don't have a lot of experience of that, but that was a community energy wind turbine scheme.
Wow.
I don't know whether it's gone ahead without us, because it needed us behind it to provide the backing, basically the financial backing. So whether that's gone ahead, I don't know. But I mean, yes, sadly, it does come down to money, a lot of this, and whether that's government subsidies. But even if it's government subsidy, all of us on this call end up paying that in our electricity bills. So, there is a balance on this. That's all I'm saying.
Brilliant. I think that's indisputable, really, particularly from the business point of view. It's interesting having you on this call as a sort of hard-nosed business interest versus academics who just like to deal with what the ideal world would look like.
Yeah, and I've had to drive that to even get the projects I'm doing. Now I've had to push back against challenges on payback to get longer paybacks. To do this wind farm, for example, in Scotland, that was a challenge. But the economics worked in the end. But there was some challenge on that, I will say. And I was championing we want to do this project anyway. It's a good project. But, maybe we just got to relax some restrictions, shall I say.
That's an interesting point, actually, Simon. Going back to one of the early questions I asked about encouraging, how do you encourage investment? And one of the things would be stop companies just looking at that short-term investment cycle and make them think about returns over, 10 years rather than just 3 or 5. That makes a huge difference to the economics, doesn't it?
It also, I suppose, depends on the business. I mean, GSK is a large pharmaceutical global company with a fairly solid revenue, but some of the other companies I've worked for in the past, they're much more short-term cycles, and that's where that becomes difficult. I used to work for Vodafone, so the mobile phone industry, ever-changing industry, subject to technology whim. I mean, that Vodafone's still there, but some other players have been absorbed I think that depends on the industry, how long you can take a longer-term view of things. Obviously, in retail, with the particularly, that must be a difficult area for this at the moment, I would say.
Okay. Thank you. Right, so going back to the questions, I'm just going to chuck this one out there in case anyone has any thoughts on it. Could building companies be forced to install heat pumps in new build housing estates rather than gas boilers in each house? Could this be encouraged as part of planning applications? What do people think?
Absolutely, yes. It should have been law. It was law. We were supposed to have zero carbon homes from 2016, and I think in about 2013, the coalition government decided to boot it out. So, and they also booted out. They reduced the provision in the electricity company obligation. They've obviously quite recently kicked out the Green Homes Grant, and so we've seen a diminution of policy that would have improved our overall energy efficiency in buildings. I suspect with something like that, you've got an option when you have a sort of building regulation applied like that, or what's sometimes called a use obligation. Where you oblige companies to put stuff in. You can either say, if you build a new house, you have to put a heat pump in, or you can say, if you build a new house, it has to be effectively zero carbon for the whole house in a estate. And there are different ways to approach that. You could sort of put a load of wind turbines in, you could put a load of solar panels in, you could put heat pumps in. So you make it tech neutral and say they have to be carbon neutral. But you could just say there are places where government has said, you will, if you want to build this, you will install this kind of technology to at least this fraction. And actually, there's no reason then you couldn't do something similar with retrofit. It'd be more politically difficult because that would be on homeowners rather than house builders. But you could say that. You could say you won't be having we're not selling gas boilers after 2030 if you wanted to be radical about it. So that would be politically more opposed, because then that'd mean head checks in your house and something like that. But to answer the question specifically, yes, you absolutely could insist that particular renewable energy or low carbon technologies were installed in homes, and you just need to have a government which is willing to say no to the building industry, because that's what our government didn't do in 2016 or in 2013 for the 2016 policy.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, this is coming in with the future home standards in 2025 for England and 2024 for other parts of the UK. So in theory, this is coming. It's not the most sort of stridently kind of ambitious piece of regulation, but yeah, we should be sort of heading towards that. I think the retrofit angle is also a much bigger challenge because there's 29 million homes in the UK, most of which 28 and a half more than that. There's very few heat pumps installed. To still have gas boilers. That's going to be a real challenge, and I guess something that the Insulate Britain are trying to draw attention to this week, last week. But yeah, I think that's definitely. I mean, it's entirely possible. And then how you deal with the existing homes market, you then have to kind of break it down and segment that somehow into the social housing stuff that's rented, stuff that's owner occupied, and there's going to be different tools to address those.
Thanks both. So the next question, is there a life cycle assessment study for renewable energy material production process, since it's an essential part for carbon emissions, or essential issue for carbon emissions? Does anybody know of life cycle assessments? I would say comparative life cycle assessments, so not just looking at renewables, but also comparing that with fossil fuels, nuclear and other energy.
Yeah, there's all sorts of different ways to approach life cycle analysis, but yes, we absolutely do that. In fact, we've actually done it on one of the projects we mentioned. We have a project called Intelligent Community Energy, and we've been looking at renewable energy systems for islands, and we have specifically looked at the LCA for a solar panel, for LCA for a wind turbine, in comparison with the diesel generation they were doing before, and that includes production of the kit and production of the diesel, but production of the solar panels as well, and it looks at the full cycle. One of our colleagues here at the Penryn campus has looked at things like comparative life cycle for biomass versus other things as well. So we can draw a pretty complete picture of that, and we know things like energy payback and carbon payback, but also the sort of the minutiae of the other stuff that's involved as well. And
so going back to your ICE project, Peter, how did the renewable stuff compare with the diesel?
I mean, pretty well. It depends what you value, obviously, but in terms of the CO2 emissions and similar, then obviously it's much reduced. In terms of the on-site emissions that are going into the local atmosphere, then it's considerably reduced. There will going to be upticks in things like rare earth minerals and things like where are they mined and such. So potentially there's a long-term problem with rare earths in the renewable energy sector. If you're going to need a lot of cobalt, a lot of lithium for different applications, energy storage and electric vehicles and things, then that's increasingly going to be an issue. But generally speaking, it's pretty positive in terms of it's often raised about how much energy it takes to produce a wind farm, and then how long it takes to get that energy back from the wind farm, and it's typically the answer is between about 6 and 12 months, and it's fairly similar for solar as well. And in terms of carbon payback as well, then it's also under 2 years for both of those things. Obviously, as you decarbonize society, then the carbon payback goes down, or it gets better because less carbon went into building in the first place. So generally, it's pretty positive. But there's a bunch of literature out there. You can look up a lot of the comparisons between renewables and other technology, and that will include full life cycle.
Fab. Thanks. The next question is actually something I hope that everybody on the panel will have a view on, which is, what can we do as individuals to push for cleaner energy production in the UK? Alice, I'm going to start with you just because you're next to Peter on my screen, but feel free to pass it on to someone else if you want.
So I always say just buy green electricity, and don't buy green electricity from someone who also sells brown electricity. You're wanting to buy electricity of people that are producing and buying PPAs of 100% renewable, because by buying that, you're forcing. If everyone in the UK bought green electricity that was from the UK, they'd have to build more in order to get the supply. And so forcing that means that we're generating more. That would be my thing. Just check who you're buying it from and actually where they're getting it.
So lead through your pocket is what you're saying. Yeah, the one thing you do is work out who you're paying and what you're paying for.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Callum?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. I think for me, one of the biggest bits is organising and getting together with your community, with other people. So whether that's, we saw a wave over sort of particularly 2019 of local people pushing their local governments to declare a climate emergency, and that that wave of basically citizen pressure on their local government pushed a lot of hundreds of local governments across the UK to do that. And they're now, as a result, looking at their planning policies and looking at all their other areas of policy on how they can deliver carbon reduction, both within the council, but also actually in many cases across the whole jurisdiction, the whole area. And some of that, planning, a lot of it is devolved to local levels with obviously, as Peter mentioned, there have been restrictions on development of wind turbines, particularly at a national level in England. But I think organising for things like that, and organising in things, I mean, one way to get around the current restrictions are using your neighbourhood plan. And again, that's a community activity where you get together, come up with a neighbourhood plan, and you can designate in that where you might want to see wind turbines developed, for instance, other things. And that's one way that you can advance actually the possibility in a regulatory sense, just actually it being allowed to build a wind turbine local to you. So I think getting together with other people, I think that's also just a really kind of, it's exciting and collaborative and social, and I think that's a quite a fun way to do it as well as obviously alongside other things like as Alice says, buying kind of from truly green electricity from good companies.
Brilliant, thank you. Simon, do you have any thoughts on what people might do, what individuals might do rather than businesses?
Yeah, that's as I always think of as a company.
Yeah,
I think the thing about which a colleague said about making sure that if you're buying renewable energy, it really is, and they're not claiming it twice or something like that, is quite important. I know there's an Ofgem investigation on that at the moment, the labelling of it. I suppose as an individual, I'm still going to come back to money, will think with their pocket. So it's got to be economic. But yeah, I mean, I'm doing it from a work perspective, obviously, but I sort of believe in it from a work perspective, having seen that it works. And I don't know how you do it, but translate my work vision into a personal vision that you just want to do it and drive forward with it. And I agree with what some of the other panel members say. The community thing will work. I think there is, unfortunately, a policy which there's definitely a policy framework to this, which is driven to a lot of it to where we are now. But yeah, just believing that it can work. And I still think there's got to be some technological changes to go 100% and stuff that we maybe don't imagine now, because obviously the grid's got to be balanced with storage, and we need some base load renewable generation. I'm not sure biomass is the answer, by the way, with NOx emissions and DRAX as an example. And I know that's maybe going out of favour, but yeah, I just think we just got to almost push forward with it, like I've done within GSK to promote it. I don't know quite how that works, but that's my idea.
Well, there's been you've made some progress if you've got projects on the ground. There's Peter, what do you think individuals can do?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the others. I'd be as Callum and Alice both referred, get your supplier who's a green supplier. I think that's really hard to tell though, actually, because most of them have green tariffs, but most of them are garbage. Basically, they're selling what we call regos, and I would say if you're going to switch, then you should look at Ecotricity, you should look at Good, and you should maybe look at Octopus. as being the ones that are actually have got green stuff going into the network as well as coming out of it through your plugs. If you can afford to, then get PV. If you can afford to, then next time your boiler gives out, think about going over to a heat pump maybe. But that requires you to have quite a bit of money. But that'll be a really good way to do a massive reduction in your personal carbon emissions. Think hard about smart meters. So these are contentious. So you can get them for free from your supplier, but are they good enough yet? In the future, they probably will be good enough. But in the future, having a smart meter is going to be a good way to access and to help the system be more renewable. Whether it is at the moment is subject for an argument. Get involved, like Callum says, in community energy if you can, and also tell your councillor, tell your MP the next time they knock on the door and say, what do you want me to do? Say more renewables, support renewable policy, support planning policy that enables renewables, support people going on bikes, all of that stuff.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We're running out of time, but there are a couple more questions in the chat, which are basically about new technologies. So if I can ask you to answer really quickly, what do you think new ways of producing either energy or electricity are coming through at the moment that people need to be aware of, that they're not really, not yet in the sort of deployment stage, but are getting there? What are the important new technologies that we can think about?
I think floating wind is going to be the next big generation technology.
Okay.
So we've got onshore wind on land. We've got offshore wind.
Peter, we're gonna run out of time. So
right.
Floating offshore wind.
Floating offshore wind, so you can build in places that are really windy, but where the water's too deep to make normal offshore commercial.
Perfect. Brilliant. Alice, what do you think?
Many things. I mean, the storage is going to be the big one of tackling intermittency and seasonal storage. So will hydrogen come into the equation? And the other kind of hidden one is obviously, fusion. Is it ever going to work? We don't know.
No, it's not. I know I'm impartial, but it's not.
we don't know either. So
stop spending billions on it when you could be spending billions on something else. Callum, what do you think?
Any billions, I'd like to say. Innovate UK. Do not
Callum, what do you think?
I think I'd just say, I think flexibility is the other bit of actual, that's something we're seeing we saw in Texas, the lack of flexibility, we're seeing it again. I think the other bit actually is that we have most of the technologies, we have all the technologies we need, to be honest. And I think that one of the biggest things around innovations is actually we need to stop telling fairy tales about these kind of magical technologies that are going to come down the track and save us. We have the stuff to do it. And you can see it particularly in another area that I kind of have an interest in, is aviation. There's constant telling of fairy tales. You look at Jet Zero and there's all this, everything's hanging on these future aviation fuels. Yes, they're coming, but they're not coming fast enough. And actually, we just need to be realistic, and I think that actually some realism to some areas that are really hard to decarbonize is very politically unpalatable, but actually very necessary if we're serious about hitting net zero and actually, preventing the worst excesses of climate breakdown.
Brilliant. Okay. And Simon, last word to you. What do you think the new technologies to think about are?
I think we just got to have some of the ones, as the colleagues have said, that are already listed, have to become more economic and cost effective. Hydrogen is an example. I think that can work. I've talked to companies where that works, but at the moment it's just not cost effective on a mass rollout. I'm never sure it'll be a total mass rollout, but I think industrials, so I'm going to run out of time, industrials like GSK could use it if it was cost effective enough. That's what I would say.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being so brief. I'd like to reiterate the sort of the storage and flexibility thing. I think they're pretty much game changers, and they completely change how you think about electricity systems. Well, I just want to say thank you, all of you, for such an informed and interesting set of responses, actually, to quite a really diverse set of questions. We've really I've learned a lot of stuff, but it's just so nice seeing everybody's sort of passion and interest in this, because it's such an important topic. And fingers crossed that your passion and enthusiasm is taken up by policymakers and politicians at the COP, because that's what we need if we're going to be addressing climate change. I'm not sure, that's us out of time, I think. So thank you. I don't know if Emma's going to pop back into the meeting or whether or not I just let you go. No idea. Does anyone know how does this end?
Hello again. Yes, I will just end it. So thank you very much for everyone joining us and for your questions. If there's anything we didn't get to, we will summarize it in a follow-up email to you in the next couple of days when we send that out. So thank you very much to our panelists and to everyone else, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you. See you
Thanks,
soon.
Emma. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.